so our ability to remain number one, competitive and so forth, means we must graduate students that can read, that can write, and that can think critically. That's what the 21st century will call for.
I see writing and thinking going hand in hand, and so I like to see people who can write. Writers are thinkers. Good writers are good thinkers.
We do landscape architecture and planning, and in planning especially, I would say 50% of the work is writing. Documentation, there's specific plans and general plans, and if you have ever seen the product, it is a booklet about that thick. In that respect, if you're a planner and you can't write, you can't be a planner.
Many of you might be surprised by what you've just heard. After all, these three people are members of professions to which, most of us would assume, writing bears little relevance. But, in fact, that just isn't the case. As a matter of fact, the comments of these professionals, a medical school dean, a physicist, a landscape architect, all indicate that just the opposite is true. Writing is one of the most important skills somebody in their profession can have.
Listen to what Professor Gregory Benford, an award-winning physicist and novelist, has to say about writing and the sciences.
Well, though few people going into physics think as they start that writing is really very important, they say, well, maybe that's due to guys, or going into English majors or something. In the long run, it turns out to be essential. In fact, at the upper echelons, the ability to express yourself generally, both in writing and in person, distinguishes the A's from the B's. And this isn't an accident either, because the higher you go in any profession, the less matters depend upon technical details, because everybody assumes you've got the technical stuff down pat if you're at your particular echelon. And the more it depends on how persuasive you are, how cleanly you can make an argument so that it appears uncluttered and unbusy and well thought through, and therefore probably more practical. And the less will depend upon your ability to integrate a differential equation or see your way through a detailed argument very quickly.
Professor Benford's opinions on the importance of writing are not unique. Many scientists in other fields say much the same thing.
Grace Quimbita is a chemist and the director of Occidental College's Academic Mastery Program for students majoring in mathematics and chemistry. It is her job to try to help students who want to excel in those fields.
Yeah, the stereotype of the typical science student or science professional who just speaks in equations is not valid at all. I mean, you definitely need communication skills, written and oral, in order to be effective, in order to present yourself and sell your ideas well and be successful. First of all, if you're going into graduate school, you have to know how to write a coherent statement of purpose. And also, if you're applying to scholarships, something like the NSF or any sort of grants, you've got to make sure that you can communicate your ideas clearly. And then after that, once you get into graduate school, I can talk more from the chemistry point of view going to graduate school. Yeah, you're doing a lot of research and a lot of laboratory work, but then there's a lot of summaries you have to make, on how your research is progressing, either to your PI or also if you're lucky, you can write something up for one of the journals.
So you see, it just doesn't pay to avoid writing. As a matter of fact, focusing on one aspect of your studies to the exclusion of all others can work against you in the long run.
As an assistant dean of students at UC Irvine's College of Medicine, Dr. Harvey Williams was often called upon to cast the deciding vote as to whether or not a student would be admitted to his school.
It's amazing what you get in an application. I remember getting a student who was a Phi Beta Kappa from Stanford, 4.0, the whole thing, and on the application, instead of writing, he drew a picture of Mickey Mouse. That was 10 years ago. That student is still not in medical school. Not only do you have to read a lot of technical information, extrapolate from that information, and then write your views and pass it on to your peers, but also in research, in citing citations, in giving seminars and giving presentations on the ward when you're making rounds. That all requires in-depth writing because it must be precise.
And mathematics is basically, although a language, it is a skill. And the energy you fashion mathematics with should also be devoted to fashioning that other tool, English, because frankly, it's going to be more useful. In the wide compass of life, it's more useful. I can't emphasize enough that becoming a narrow specialist when you're young is a short-term strategy. It will appear to pay off well, but in the long run, it will hobble you. You sharpen a knife by narrowing it slowly, and you put an edge on it. But if you do that long enough, the knife goes away, you know. You can sharpen it into oblivion. And so you end up being the world's greatest expert on a minute piece of information.
Concentrating too narrowly on a few subjects, especially if that narrow focus avoids the study of communication skills such as writing, can be especially devastating to your long-term success if you end up working in private industry. Most jobs there require a lot of writing.
I just can't walk out the door and spend $1 million. I need to justify that. I need to document why we need that. Status reports, project reports, contracts with other companies, intercompany business correspondence. I supervise engineers who need to write up test procedures, technology memos, articles for technical journals. So we write, I think we write every day. Every one of us write every day.
We do try to recommend to students when they come talk to us about future jobs where they should take some focus, talking about the broad-based backgrounds and try not to specialize too deep, too much. Keep that broad perspective if you can. Take oral communications classes, technical writing type classes for the written communication, because those skills are critical in our job, in our world. At this level, we're not doing field work. We're doing analysis work. And to do that, to succeed, you've got to be able to communicate. I mean, that's what you're doing. The people who are doing the field work don't have to. They just write down numbers on the forms and they give them to you, and then you're required to take that and communicate the importance of that information to someone else. You've got to provide enough technical information so that technical reviewers will be satisfied. They can draw those conclusions that you've drawn from the information you provide, but also to provide the information in such a way that the lay public can understand, so that they can come to the same conclusions. If you don't, you're guaranteed to have major problems.
I'm glad you asked. So far, we've tried to dispel several misconceptions that students going into the technical professions tend to have about writing, and those are:
Number one, scientists and technical professionals don't have to write much. They just work with equations, test tubes, drawings, and charts. Number two, writing won't help me get promoted in these fields. Number three, someone else will do the writing for me. As we've seen, such assumptions are simply not true.
A final misconception that many people harbor is that they can put off learning to write, that their employer will teach them what they need to know. The truth is that most businesses don't want to spend the time or the money to train you in a skill as basic as writing. You may not get hired if you don't have writing skills.
You may be able to draw, be an excellent designer, and if you can't put together your thoughts on paper, or even a cover letter for a resume, we laugh a lot at some of those letters. I hate to say it, but those letters are sometimes could be misrepresenting a very talented person because that person doesn't know how to write.
If their cover letter or resume look unpolished, is one big point against them. If there's misspellings galore and mispunctuation and just lack of thoroughness, And there are so many of these. I can't believe it, that there are so many of such resumes and cover letters. When I see them, there's one big point against them. And I read on. That's my job, to find the best candidate for this company. But I read on looking for offsetting attributes. And if I don't see something that distinguishes this candidate from another, something so strong so I can overlook his poor writing skills, and the person won't even get an interview.
I won't hire you unless you have adequate writing skills. Part of our testing, in fact, part of our evaluation of an applicant, of a proposed applicant, is their writing ability. We give them a writing test.
Medical schools take the assumption that if you really wanted to go to medical school, you should have prepared yourself. We don't have time for remedial education.
So you see, it's important to start working on your writing skills now. Writing is not an obstruction on the path to your future career as a scientist, engineer, doctor, urban planner, or landscape architect. It's critical to any career that you choose to go into. So you ask yourself, this is all well and good, but what can I do now to improve my chances in the professional world of the future? Well, let's see what those who will be hiring you, promoting you, and admitting you to graduate school recommend.
The more writing course work that you can take, the better. You know, it's all, everything that we're doing out of this office depends on communication.
I would recommend that students with a ESL background, or students who aren't very proficient in English, take that freshman English class very seriously. Take 2 if you can. Consider going back to the junior college over the summer and take a class. When you write up that lab report, just don't put equations and numbers. Annotate it with full paragraphs. Read a major newspaper daily. Read the LA Times. Pick it up, read it, circle every new word that you encounter. Learn the new words.
Take a good course in writing, and if possible, get a course in critical writing so that it can be evaluated and the instructor can get back to you and tell you where you need to improve.
There's only one way to improve your writing, and that's through writing. Although reading helps a lot.
In drawing as in writing, there's a certain amount of given talent that you have. And everybody could be better. And it takes practice, I think. And like you mentioned, exposure to good writing. If you can read good writing and at least recognize it, study it, try to emulate it.
You may not think it's important now, and you may scream and holler about practicing writing your writing skills, but heck, when you graduate and you get into the real world, you're going to need it, because you're going to need to write proposals, reports, communicate with the outside world. And if anything should drive you, if you need money, you need money to fund your research, and you're definitely going to have to write well to get that. And it's getting much more competitive in getting funding for a lot of research now. And that's it. So think long term. Think long term.